Is going to be former Labour advisor Mike Buckley. Mike, great to have you on the programme.
Hi there, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you doing?
Not bad, thanks, very well.
Let's kick off, first of all, with Lee Anderson and his fruity language. Now, I can imagine where you might stand on this, but does he not really just reflect the mood of the general population who constantly hear in the news every single day the government's got a plan to deal with channel crossings, they've got a plan to save on hotel bills, they've come up with at least one small solution, one barge which is supposed to house around 500 people, and now even that seems to be thwarted with asylum seekers saying, well, I don't want to stay on it, I'm scared of water.
I mean, the barge it's just a distraction and it's just theatre. I mean, we're all talking about the barge. Because we're all talking about the barge, we're not talking about the fact that the government have failed catastrophically on asylum. I was just looking at some numbers before I came on. We've got about 180,000 people in the UK, present in the UK right now, who are waiting to have their asylum process claimed, their asylum claim processed, rather. That's a lot more people than 500 people. Even if this barge was full, it would take hardly anybody out of temporary accommodation, housing, hotels. What the government need to do, and this has been said before many times, needs to be said again, they need to process claims. If they process claims, then people can move, then people are then, it's their own responsibility to then get housing, go and get a job, get education, live their lives. And they can do so freely in the UK just like anybody else, which is great. If their claim fails, they need to return to where they came from. But we also know the government have failed miserably over the last decade to return people to where they came from. So we used to return a far higher proportion of failed asylum claims than we do now. That number's dropped precipitously in the last decade because this government is failing. They want us all talking about the barge. They want us all talking about asylum seekers that will go on it or won't go on it. So we don't look at the catastrophic failure, which, by the way, is failing people's lives. That's 180,000 people who just want to get on with their lives, and they're prevented from doing so. It costs us as the nation a lot of money. $6 million a day we're spending on hotel claims because they won't process claims. They can't even say that they can't afford to employ the people to process the claims, because if they weren't paying all that on hotel bills, they could employ people.
But arguably, one of the spanners in the works when it comes to processing asylum applications is surely the amount of legal challenges that place. We've got a situation, 50,000 people waiting for their asylum applications to be processed in hotels. You'd need 100 bibby barges to actually mop up that number. And at the moment, we've just got 15 people on one of them, and 20 already have been using lawyers funded by the British taxpayer, by and large, to prevent being put on this vessel. I mean, is this not another reason why the government can't get through all of the backlog of cases? Because immigration lawyers will do anything they can, as well as their claimants, to try and make sure that whatever decision is taken goes to appeal.
Well, the majority of appeals are upheld and given asylum status, so it's quite reasonable if somebody's rejected for them to put an appeal in, because they that's a legal right that they have, but also because claims are accepted. That, again, though, is the government's responsibility. If they employed the right people, if they trained those people, the right decision will be made in the first place. And we all, I'm sure everybody watching your programme or listening to it on the radio, wants genuine asylum seekers to be given asylum. These are people who've come from persecution, they've come from a war zone, they've come from famine, they've come from natural disaster, they've come from incredibly difficult circumstances. We are, as is often said by people on all sides of the political spectrum, a warm, embracing, welcoming nation when people are in genuine need. The only people we don't want to be given asylum are people who don't deserve it because they've lied on their application or they don't fall into one of the criteria. So those people, you're right, they need to be assessed and they need to be returned back to where they came from, which the government is failing to do. But if the claims were processed accurately in the first place, which means employing capable people, making sure that they're trained, there'd be no need for appeals, or those appeals would normally fail, and then it would be less likely, I guess, that people would put in. But the extra time goes into paying the lawyer and into the second processing, because the first processing wasn't done correctly.
But the difficulty is, of course, people will turn up, they will throw their passports into the ocean, they will lie about their age, and it's very hard to discern when it's basically one person's story, whether or not they've been forced by a trafficker to get rid of their identity, and they genuinely are someone who's been under the thumb of an oppressive regime and their life is at risk, or if this is just an opportunist connected to a criminal gang, or worse still, perhaps a terrorist organisation who wants to get into this country undetected and slip away into the system. So how on earth do you speed up a process like that? How on earth can you make sure that you're coming to the right decision? And as you said, making sure we protect those who require our protection, but making sure we weed out those people who are gaming the system.
Well, you're right. We do need to weed out those people. That's very important. I mean, we do thankfully know that it's a very, very small number of people who will try and get into the country to do something bad. And indeed, I mean, very sadly, when things do occur here in terms of, attacks or anything like that, it's the vast majority of it is a white British person. And so we don't have a problem with lots of things happening in the UK that are, attacks or whatever that are done by asylum seekers, because that's a really good thing, or indeed refugees. So it tends to follow the proportion of the population is what I'm saying. But the conclusion is to that, you're right, it is difficult. Of course it's difficult. If you've got someone sitting in front of you saying, I'm being persecuted in my home country because of my religion or because of my parents or because of my sexuality or whatever, how do you know whether that's accurate or not? To some degree, it's subjective, and the person, putting the claim through, the staff member from the Home Office, they do need to some degree think, well, do I believe this person? Is this a credible story? Does it match up? Do the dates match up? Does this person look like they're telling the truth? Is there some detail there? Is it a story with a beginning, middle, and end that I think I can believe? They need to do all of that. Of course, they do also do lots of checks online, and we now live in a very connected world, so they can do checks online to make sure, to work out as much as they can. Does this person exist? Did they exist in their home country? Are there any records that we can access? What documentation do they have? I mean, bear in mind, these people often walked or otherwise travelled, many thousands of miles, particularly if they've come from persecution or a war zone. There may not be much left for them to bring in the first place. But if they've got documentation, that's helpful. Otherwise, in some cases, there will be information available online as well.
I mean, is there not a risk, though, that if we speed up applications, and particularly if we turn around and, on account of, you mentioned it, someone saying I'm homosexual, there are no LGBTQ rights in my own country. I mean, that's basically 3/4 of the world. Around, 75% of countries outlaw homosexuality in some form. And if we end up speeding up applications and saying, right, you definitely come from poverty, well, that's 17 billion other people. Right, you come from a conflict zone or where there's civil unrest. That's at least 14 countries in live unrest at the moment. Or I'm, from a country that won't allow me to be openly gay. Well, again, that's a huge chunk of the planet. So is there not a risk if we start speeding up these applications and we don't actually say, I'm sorry, you've got to meet a higher bar than that, or you go through some of the lawful routes we've already set up to named countries, be they Afghanistan, Hong Kong, etc. You can't come here, because I don't see how you can essentially reach out your hands to everybody who's having a tough time in their own country.
I mean, clearly not everybody's going to come to the UK, and the vast majority of people don't even want to come to the UK. There are other countries in Europe, there are other countries in the world that take a far higher number and far higher proportion of asylum seekers than we do. Some people do want to the UK. That often is because they have some kind of link. So there's a family member here already, or they speak English, or they have some other link to the country. You use the example of Afghanistan. There are lots of people, of course, coming here who work for the British Army in Afghanistan, and that therefore isn't safe for them to be there under the Taliban. I mean, you're right, we have a scheme where those people, can approach here through a safe and legal route, which means that they don't need to put their lives at risk on a boat. Not everybody can come to the UK. Nobody suggests that they should. My solution to that, or one thing that lots of people would suggest, is that we have some agreement Europe-wide, because there are lots of people coming to Europe. When we were in the EU, we did have an agreement with Europe where, things would be shared. And actually, the EU is moving to a position where it wants to share but more equally, because at the moment, obviously, lots of people go to Greece, lots of people go to Italy. Far few people say go to Denmark because they're north rather than south. So they want a collective system. And I think long term it would be much better for the UK if we had a collective system where we had, a proportion that we could deal with, and other asylum seekers that were shared out. That currently isn't the case. But we have a set of laws in place. Some are international laws that we're signed up to, like the Refugee Convention and the European Convention on Human Rights. We can choose to leave those if we want to, but we haven't. So currently we're signed up to that. We need to, obey the laws that we've signed up to, which are external to us.
Well, I'd argue as well the government should obey the will of the people, which was for this country to control its own borders and not to allow the EU to determine what ratio of their migrants that we take on, because they're at the frontier of this.